Welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Love and War Story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to watch more exciting episodes, where each story brings you closer to the stars. Let's dive into today's tale, where humanity faces its greatest challenge, yet a challenge that begins with an alien, a promise, and a life-changing gift. Tonight's story begins with an unexpected encounter in the remote wilderness of Alaska. Meet John, a solitary man living in the harsh, frozen world of Alaska. But one fateful night, as a fierce snowstorm rages outside, he opens his door to find something or someone that will change his life forever. Keris, an alien from a distant star system, arrives seeking refuge from the cold, offering a mysterious gift in return. What begins as a simple act of kindness soon leads to an adventure that spans galaxies, uncovering secrets, technology, and an unbreakable bond across worlds. Now, let's explore the heart of this extraordinary story and discover. The wind howled through the trees outside John's cabin, a shrill whistle that seemed to pierce the silence of the isolated Alaskan wilderness. Snowflakes danced wildly through the air, caught in the powerful gusts, swirling around in an endless vortex of white. The biting cold seeped into every crack and crevice, forcing John to pull his thick parka tighter around his body. He sat by the fire, the flickering orange flames casting long shadows that played across the cabin's wooden walls, the warmth of the hearth the only thing that made the harsh winter bearable. John had lived here alone for years, surrounded by the vast, silent wilderness. The constant chill, the endless snowstorms, he had grown accustomed to the solitude. Tonight, however, the storm seemed fiercer than usual, as if the wind itself was trying to break through the cabin walls. Suddenly, as John sat gazing into the fire, he heard something. It was a faint sound, carried on the wind, a voice, almost like a whisper, yet it was distinct enough to catch his attention. His heart skipped a beat. The sound came again, clearer this time, rising above the storm's roar. Voice, softly, urgently. "Help, protect me from the cold." John froze. His eyes widened in disbelief as he strained to listen, trying to locate the source of the voice. Was it his mind playing tricks on him, or was something or someone out there in the storm? The voice came again, more distinct, with an unmistakable urgency. Voice. "If you protect me from the cold, I will reward you, human." John's breath caught in his throat. He stood up slowly, heart pounding in his chest. What in the world was going on? He couldn't ignore it. The desperation in that voice was real. His instincts told him this wasn't just another hallucination brought on by isolation. Someone or something needed help. He stepped to the door, pulled it open, and was immediately greeted by a brutal rush of icy wind. The snowstorm raged, an unforgiving blanket of white that obscured his view of the world beyond. But through the swirling snow, he saw her, a figure standing in the storm, a tall, slender woman with bluish skin that shimmered faintly in the dim light of the lanterns inside the cabin. Her appearance was unlike anything John had ever seen. Her skin was almost translucent, her features delicate and ethereal, her large eyes glowing with a soft, otherworldly light. She looked alien, yet somehow, she seemed human. Her body trembled against the cold, and she took a step toward him, her movements graceful despite the harsh conditions. John, stunned, muttering to himself. "What? Who are you?" Keris, with a soft but urgent voice. "If you protect me from the cold, I will reward you, human." Her voice was calm, but the urgency in it made John's heart race. There was something undeniably different about her, a presence that was both beautiful and unsettling, a quiet power radiating from her. The storm seemed to part for her, as if nature itself knew to make way for her. John, still in shock, hesitated for a moment. His mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. But in the end, the desperation in her glowing eyes won him over. With a deep breath, he stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. John, narrating. I never imagined I'd find myself in the presence of an alien, but there she was, standing before me, trembling, seeking refuge from the same cold I had grown so accustomed to. She glided inside with an almost unnatural elegance, the snowflakes melting as they touched her skin. The warmth of the cabin seemed to surround her, but she was still visibly cold. She moved near the fire, her translucent hair catching the light as she settled beside it, pulling her body close to the flames. John closed the door, his mind still spinning, but he couldn't deny the strange feeling that this moment was something beyond ordinary. There was a weight to the air now, an electric, almost mystical charge that he couldn't ignore. As the fire crackled, John watched Keris carefully. Her skin, once pale blue, had begun to regain some color, the cold of the storm no longer consuming her as it had when she first arrived. But still, she shivered slightly, her body weak from the harshness of Earth's winter. She leaned toward the fire, absorbing its warmth, and then, after a long pause, she began to speak in a voice that was as soft and melodic as the wind. Keris. My name is Keris. I come from a distant star system, far beyond the reach of your world. My people are explorers, traveling from planet to planet in search of knowledge, seeking to understand the vastness of the universe. John listened intently, but the words were difficult to fully comprehend. She spoke with a mixture of melodic tones, but her message seemed to transcend language. It felt like she was not just speaking, but projecting thoughts directly into his mind, giving him a sense of her origin, something beyond human understanding. John, narrating, skeptical yet intrigued. She was an alien, there was no doubt about it. But the way she spoke, there was something in the tone, something in her presence that made me believe she wasn't just a visitor from another planet. She was something more. Keris, continuing. Our resources are dwindling. We sought new worlds to learn from, to perhaps share in mutual benefit. But my ship malfunctioned, and I was forced to crash land here. The cold is unlike anything we've ever known. It is consuming me. John's mind raced. An alien, stranded on Earth. He had heard stories, but this was no science fiction. She was here, in his cabin, and she was in trouble. John, narrating, confused. My mind struggled to wrap around the reality of it. An alien, stranded in the snow, needing help. It felt like a dream, yet I could see her, feel her presence in the room with me. John, half joking, trying to lighten the mood. What kind of reward are we talking about? Keris smiled, her translucent hair shimmering in the firelight. She tilted her head slightly, as if amused by his question. Then, her eyes darkened with purpose, and she spoke with a hint of mystery. Keris, mysteriously. Knowledge. A gift from my people. Something that will change your life forever. But first, I need your help, human. Help me survive this cold, and I will show you wonders beyond your imagination. John was taken aback. Knowledge? He had no idea what that meant, but something about her words stirred something deep inside him, curiosity, hope, maybe even fear. John, narrating, uncertain. I didn't know whether to be excited or terrified. An alien offering me knowledge that could change my life? It seemed too good to be true. But the sincerity in her eyes told me otherwise. John nodded, a mix of excitement and trepidation building in his chest. John. All right, let's start with keeping you warm for now. You've got my attention. Outside, the snowstorm continues to rage, the howling wind slashing against the cabin's walls. The snowflakes twist and swirl like a dance of restless spirits, painting the world outside in a blinding whiteness. Inside, however, the cabin is warm and flickering with the orange glow of the fire. The heat from the flames casts long, twisting shadows across the rough-hewn wooden walls, a stark contrast to the violent storm outside. John sits near the hearth, feeling the comforting warmth seep into his bones, while Keris settles herself near the fire, her bluish skin shimmering faintly in the dim light. She looks fragile, but there's a quiet power in her presence, a sense of otherworldliness that John can't quite grasp. Her delicate features are drawn with exhaustion, but the faint glow in her eyes remains undiminished. The silence between them is filled with unspoken questions. John tries to shake the lingering uncertainty from his mind. John, narrating. The storm outside felt like it would never end. Yet in this moment, it almost seemed irrelevant. All I could focus on was the alien woman sitting across from me, her presence both a mystery and a revelation. Keris, after a long pause, her voice almost musical. Let me show you something. Something that will help you understand. With a soft gesture, Keris reaches into the folds of her cloak and pulls out a small, sleek device. It's smooth, metallic, with no buttons or markings, seemingly impossibly simple. She presses a small indent on the surface, and the device hums to life, glowing with a soft, bluish light. Keris. Here, take this. It purifies water with a single press of a button. John watches in awe as the device floats in the air for a moment before he hesitantly takes it into his hands. The moment his fingers touch the surface, the device shifts slightly. He places it into a small bowl of water that he had set aside for his own needs. With a soft beep, the water begins to clear, the liquid transforming from murky to perfectly clear in seconds. John, in disbelief, voice trembling. How can this be possible? This is beyond anything I've seen. The device hums quietly in his hand, its glow fading as it finishes its task. It feels light, like a piece of the future, sleek and efficient. He hands it back to Keris, still stunned by the sheer simplicity and effectiveness of the technology. Keris, smiling softly, her eyes glowing. This is just the beginning. There are many more things you will learn, but first, I must recover. John nods, but his mind is already racing. This was no ordinary technology. It was unlike anything from Earth. What other secrets did Keris hold? He wanted to ask more, but he could see that Keris was weakening again. The cold outside might have receded, but she still appeared fragile, as if her body could not fully cope with the harshness of Earth's atmosphere. He watches as she sits back, her translucent hair glowing faintly in the firelight, and the air in the cabin feels charged heavy with the promise of more to come. The fire crackles in the hearth, sending small bursts of warmth throughout the cabin. John sits back in his chair, his mind still trying to process the alien technology Keris had shown him. He watches her carefully, wondering more about the mysterious woman and the world she comes from. John, after a long pause, his curiosity growing. What is your world like? Keris' eyes gleam with a faraway look, as though she is revisiting memories too distant to touch. Her voice is soft, but there's a subtle power behind it, as though each word carries with it an ancient weight. Keris. My world is bathed in eternal twilight. There is no harsh sunlight, only soft, diffused light from the two stars that circle our planet. Our forests are filled with crystalline trees, their trunks and branches shimmering in the constant glow. Our oceans sparkle like liquid gemstones, vast and endless, filled with life that you cannot even begin to imagine. John imagines it a world where the sun never fully rises, and the air is thick with the soft glow of stars. The image is surreal, and yet, as she speaks, he can almost feel the warmth of it, as if the glow of her words had transported him there. He imagines walking through these glittering forests, surrounded by the tranquility of a world in perfect balance. The imagery is so vivid, he could almost see it with his eyes closed. Keris, continuing. Our people value harmony above all else. We have lived in balance with nature for millennia, studying the rhythms of our planet. We learned to coexist with our environment, using technology that works in sync with nature, not against it. Our cities are built with this philosophy in mind, organic structures that grow with the land. John, mesmerized. That sounds beautiful. A place where everything is in perfect balance. Keris, nodding slowly, her expression darkening slightly. It was. But now, our resources are dwindling. The balance that we have so carefully maintained is faltering. The stars we once relied upon have begun to change. We sought new worlds to learn from, perhaps to share in mutual benefit. And Earth. Earth was one of those worlds we hoped to learn from. We thought your people might help us. John feels the weight of her words, the deep sadness that lingers in her voice. Her world, her people were facing a crisis. The harmony she spoke of was being threatened, and now, she was stranded here on Earth, hoping for something that might save them. John, sensing the gravity of the situation. You came here to, what? To find help. Keris. Yes. But more than that. We came to learn, to understand. Our civilization is not without flaws. We sought to grow beyond our own limitations. And in return, we believed we could share our knowledge, our advancements with others. To help, to heal. John watches her closely, seeing the flicker of vulnerability in her glowing eyes. Despite her alien nature, there's something deeply human about her, her struggle to survive, her desire to help, to make a difference. For a moment, John feels a deep connection, an unspoken understanding that transcends their differences. The fire crackles, casting warm, shifting shadows across the walls of the cabin. Outside, the storm begins to subside, and the wind's howl softens, as if the very world around them is listening to her story, holding its breath in reverence. John, narrating, softly. It felt like the walls of my world were crumbling away. This wasn't just an alien asking for help. This was a species on the brink of losing everything, and I, just an ordinary man, was caught in the middle of it all. The next morning, the air inside the cabin felt heavier. The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting flickering shadows on the walls, but something felt wrong. Keris, who had been recovering steadily, now lay curled on the small cot by the fireplace. Her skin, once a shimmering blue, had dulled to a muted shade, almost grayish. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her large eyes, usually so vibrant, now appeared clouded, the intensity of their glow dimming. Keris, weakly. The cold, it's consuming me. John knelt beside her, his heart pounding in his chest. His attempts to help her had all been in vain. The blankets, the makeshift heater, the little technologies she'd shown him, all had been futile. The frostbite on her skin seemed to spread, and her body was growing weaker with each passing minute. The very air around her felt colder, as if the chill of the outside world had seeped into her, taking root. John felt a cold sweat form on his brow. He'd never imagined that something so small, just the difference in temperature between her alien body and Earth's frigid winters, could cause such devastation. She was an alien, yes, but she was also alive, fragile and full of promise. And now, that life was fading before him. John, frantic, trying to maintain control. "We need to get you back to your ship. Maybe it can help." Keris barely nodded, but the weak motion was enough to spur John into action. He could feel panic clawing at him, but he couldn't afford to show it. He needed to be strong for her. His mind raced as he helped her slowly to her feet, supporting her weight with one arm. Her body trembled violently, her steps slow and uncertain. She looked like she might collapse at any moment, but John wouldn't let that happen. John, narrating. "I had no idea if we could make it. The forest was treacherous, covered in thick snow drifts, and the storm outside was far from over. But Keris couldn't stay here, not like this. Her life was slipping away, and there was only one place I could think of to save her." He pulled on his heavy parka and led her out the door, squinting as the brutal winds blasted his face. The snowstorm was relentless, the visibility so poor that the trees just beyond the cabin were lost in a blur of white. The cold stung, cutting through layers of clothing, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not now. John, narrating. "The wind cut through me like 1,000 icy daggers. The snow swirled around us, nearly blinding us, but I pushed forward, my every step a struggle against the force of nature. I had to get her to the crash site. I had to." Keris leaned heavily on him, her breathing ragged, her body shaking with each step. Her skin seemed to shimmer faintly in the storm, but it was as if the storm itself was draining her. The forest felt eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of snow beneath their boots and the fierce howl of the wind. It felt like an eternity, the thick snow making the journey slower with each step. The wind was deafening, drowning out all other noise, but John pushed on, guided by nothing but the desperate hope that her ship, her technology could save her. After what seemed like hours, they finally arrived at the crash site. The snow had drifted so high that Keris' sleek silver pod was almost completely buried, its once sleek surface now hidden beneath mounds of snow and ice. The ship's metallic sheen still reflected a faint glimmer of light, but it was clear that it had been here for a while. The damage was evident: a few jagged dents along the pod's surface, the exhaust panel half buried in snow. But despite its rough landing, the craft seemed to hum with quiet life, as though waiting for them. Keris steadied herself against the pod, her strength waning, but determination still shining in her eyes. She reached out, her hands trembling slightly as she pressed a series of glowing symbols along the side of the ship. The symbols lit up, one after the other, as if the ship itself was responding to her touch. Keris, whispering, relieved. "Thank you. You've saved me." The pod's systems hummed to life, the interior lights flickering on, casting a soft, ethereal glow in the otherwise dark snowfield. A faint warmth began to emanate from the ship, and Keris seemed to breathe easier, her shoulders relaxing slightly as the heat enveloped her. John watched in awe as Keris stepped inside, her movements graceful despite her weakened state. The interior of the pod was unlike anything he had ever seen: sleek, metallic surfaces with glowing, intricate symbols that seemed to pulse softly. In the center of the room was a compartment filled with strange vials and devices, their designs foreign and alien to anything on Earth. Keris knelt beside the compartment, her hands delicate as she retrieved one of the vials. It was filled with a glowing, fluid-like substance, its color shifting between shades of blue and green. She uncapped the vial with ease and applied a small amount of the substance to her skin. Almost immediately, John watched in awe as her color began to return. Her skin, once dull, shimmered faintly, regaining its vibrancy. The warmth that filled the room seemed to revive her, her breaths coming more easily now. Keris, grateful, her voice stronger. "I can never repay you for your kindness, human. You saved me, when all seemed lost. John stood in the doorway of the pod, his heart still racing. The sight of Keris' recovery was a small victory, but the relief was fleeting. As she applied the glowing substance, a sudden rumble vibrated through the ground, followed by a deep, thunderous noise. John's eyes shot upward instinctively, his pulse quickening. Above them, a massive shadow loomed, a far larger ship, unlike anything he had ever seen. It descended from the sky with a smooth, menacing grace, its edges gleaming in the weak light of the storm. The ship's size was overwhelming, casting a massive shadow over the forest as it hovered ominously above the trees. Keris' expression shifted from relief to alarm, her eyes widening with recognition. Keris, her voice now filled with dread. "They've come for me." John, narrating. I could feel the air grow heavy, the moment suspended in time. There was no doubt now, whatever this was, it wasn't a simple rescue. We were in deeper than I could ever have imagined. The ship's shadow loomed larger as it descended, its dark shape now visible against the swirling snow. Something far worse than the cold was coming. The warmth from the ship began to soothe Keris, her color returning slowly as she recovered. The hum of the ship's systems was a comfort, a small oasis of hope amidst the cold chaos of Earth's frozen wilderness. But as she took a deep breath, something in the air shifted in unmistakable tension. Keris' eyes widened in horror, her pupils dilating with fear. Keris, frantically, voice trembling. "They've found us. They are hunters. They track my kind across galaxies." John's heart sank. He looked up, searching the sky, but for a moment, he could only see the swirling snow. Then, a shadow began to grow, slowly blocking out the weak light from above. The air felt thick with dread. A heavy mechanical sound rumbled through the ground, sending vibrations into the very earth beneath their feet. The wind shifted, the snow swirling violently, and then there it was. A massive ship, black as night, descended through the snowstorm. Unlike Keris' sleek silver pod, this vessel was enormous, its dark, jagged edges casting an ominous shadow over the landscape. The ship's surface was smooth and reflective, dark metal gleaming in the storm's dim light, with sharp, angular lines that seemed to slice through the air like blades. The craft moved with eerie precision, its mechanical legs unfolding with a terrible, creaking sound. The legs were like enormous spindles, like the limbs of a spider, strong and unyielding. From the underside of the ship, monstrous figures emerged, creatures of metal and iron, towering and mechanical, their movements smooth but unrelenting. They were built for destruction, their forms hulking and threatening, with cold, unblinking eyes that reflected the harsh light of the storm. They scanned the area, their movements deliberate, as if they were hunting something or someone. Keris, voice steady but filled with dread. "These are the hunters. They are relentless. They hunt my people across the stars, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake." Without hesitation, Keris activated a small device from her wrist. A low hum filled the air, and a soft shimmer began to form around them. The energy wave spread out, creating a translucent, glimmering barrier that enveloped them like a protective shield. It flickered, its edges rippling like the surface of a pond disturbed by a stone. "Keris, urgently. I cannot hold this for long. We must escape." John stood frozen for a moment, his thoughts racing. He had no idea how to fight these mechanical giants. How could he? He was just a man, standing against beings from another galaxy. But the look in Keris' eyes, the desperate, determined look, made his decision clear. John, defiant, gripping his flare gun tightly. "No. We fight together." He moved quickly, positioning himself beside Keris, who was visibly straining against the power of the barrier she had created. The hunters were closing in, their massive forms slowly advancing, testing the limits of the shimmering shield. John's mind raced as he glanced at the hunters' relentless approach. They were not going to wait. They would break through, and the moment they did, all hope would be lost. The barrier flickered, and the hunters began to probe it, their mechanical hands reaching toward the force field, their movements slow but methodical. One of the creatures lifted a large, jagged weapon, its blade crackling with energy. It was just a matter of time before the barrier would falter. With the hunters closing in, John made up his mind. He grabbed the flare gun from his pack, a crude but perhaps the only weapon he had against the towering mechanical creatures. He aimed carefully, taking a deep breath, and fired. The flare shot through the air, a burst of blinding light. It struck one of the hunters directly in the chest, causing an explosion that sent a shockwave of heat through the air. The hunter staggered back, momentarily disoriented, its mechanical limbs thrashing in the air. John, shouting to Keris, "Now, let's run." Without hesitation, Keris unleashed a powerful burst of energy from her device. The force wave slammed into the remaining hunters, sending them reeling back with an explosion of sparks and shrill metallic screeches. The hunters' enormous frames were thrown off balance, and for a split second, they staggered, their advanced technology struggling to process the unexpected attack. John, narrating. The explosion had given us a precious moment just long enough to make a break for it. We weren't out of danger yet, but it felt like we had a chance. Keris seized the opportunity. She turned, her glowing eyes filled with determination, and sprinted into the forest, John right behind her. The trees loomed large and twisted in the snow, their branches heavy with ice. The storm continued to howl, but now it felt like an ally, a cloak of chaos to hide them from the hunters' prying sensors. Keris, urgently, leading the way. "Follow me. We're almost there." The sound of mechanical footsteps echoed behind them, heavy and unyielding, but Keris led them to a hidden alcove, a small break in the forest that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. It was dark here, the snow untouched, and John could barely make out the faint outline of an ancient stone formation hidden beneath the trees. Keris, activating another device, her fingers trembling. "This will take me home." A low hum filled the air, and then, like the opening of a dream, a shimmering portal appeared in the center of the alcove. It was a swirling vortex of light and energy, its surface rippling like water disturbed by a stone. It beckoned them, pulsing with warmth and hope. Keris, turning to John, her eyes filled with sadness. "You cannot come with me." John, sadly, voice cracking. "Will I ever see you again?" For a moment, Keris hesitated, her gaze softening. Then, with a calm but sorrowful expression, she placed her hand on his shoulder. "Keris," softly. "Perhaps. But for now, take this." She handed him a small, glowing crystal, its surface humming with energy. John took it in his hand, its warmth radiating against his skin. He wanted to say something more, but words seemed insufficient. He looked into her eyes one last time, and before he could speak, she turned and stepped into the portal. As she did, the shimmering doorway closed behind her, leaving John standing alone in the silence of the forest, the cold wind sweeping around him. The hunters were still near, but for now, they were forgotten. All he had now was the crystal and the knowledge that, somehow, the bond between them was deeper than he had ever realized. Back in the cabin, the storm had subsided, leaving a stillness in its wake. The wind had softened to a whisper, and the snow clung to the trees outside, creating an eerie silence. John stood by the hearth, the faint glow of the fire reflecting off the smooth, glowing crystal that Keris had left him. Its surface pulsed gently in his hand, as if alive with energy, like the heartbeat of something ancient. As his fingers traced the crystal's surface, a sudden rush of energy surged through him. The world around him blurred, the walls of his small cabin vanishing as his senses were flooded with images, ideas, and concepts that seemed to come from another reality altogether. His breath quickened as he saw blueprints intricate and detailed flashing before his eyes. They were designs for machines that could purify water effortlessly, harness the power of the sun, and even bend the forces of nature to create sustainable energy. John, narrating, voice tinged with awe. I could feel the weight of it all, the knowledge, the power. Keris' gift was more than I could have imagined. The future, an unknown future, was now in my hands. The visions continued, each one more astounding than the last. John saw advanced medical treatments that could heal the sick, devices capable of turning waste into usable resources, and farming technologies that could grow crops without harming the environment. Ideas for creating energy sources that didn't harm the planet unfolded in his mind like an ancient scroll being unrolled. It was all their solutions to problems humanity had struggled with for centuries. His mind raced as the knowledge flooded his thoughts. It was overwhelming, yet exhilarating. He knew he had to act quickly. John didn't fully understand all of it, but the crystal seemed to guide him, leading him step by step, showing him how to make it real. Over the next few days, John worked tirelessly. He used what he had learned to improve his cabin, turning it into a self-sustaining home. Solar panels appeared on the roof, capturing the energy of the sun. A water purifier, simple but effective, hummed softly in the corner. As the knowledge continued to flow from the crystal, he began to think of the people in the surrounding communities, those living in isolation much like he had been. John, narrating. I knew that what I had was no longer just for me. It was for everyone who needed it. The world, or at least my corner of it, was about to change. Years passed, and the cabin that John had once lived in solitude in became a center for learning and innovation. Word had spread, as it always does, and soon, people from surrounding towns began to make the journey to see him, seeking out the miraculous advancements he had created. People came to learn how to grow food in barren soil, how to purify water with the simplest of tools, how to heal with methods they had never dreamed of. The world around John had transformed. Where once there had been only snow and silence, now there were thriving communities, powered by the very knowledge Keris had gifted him. Renewable energy powered homes and farms. Medical facilities used advanced treatments to heal illnesses that had once been thought incurable. The landscape had changed. What had once been cold and unforgiving was now a place where life flourished, thanks to the wisdom Keris had left behind. John had become something of a legend. People would visit him, asking how he had come to possess such knowledge, but he would only ever smile and call it a stroke of inspiration. He never told anyone about Keris or where it had come from. The gift she had left him was too precious to be shared with the world. It was his legacy, one he had promised to honor. John, reflecting, voice soft and contemplative. I never saw her again, but I felt her presence in every change I made. Her legacy, the knowledge she left me, had changed my world. I honored her trust by sharing it with those who needed it. I only hoped she knew. As the years passed, the seasons continued to change. Spring gave way to summer, summer to fall, and fall to winter once again. Each cycle brought with it more progress, more advancements. But as John stood one quiet evening, looking up at the stars, he couldn't help but wonder if Keris was watching from afar, somewhere out in the vast, endless universe. The sky was clear that night, the stars twinkling like diamonds scattered across the dark velvet of space. The cold winds had returned, but they seemed softer now, almost comforting, as if the world was in harmony once more. John, whispering to himself, with a sense of quiet hope. Perhaps one day, I will find a way to repay her. Perhaps one day, she'll return, and we'll meet again. The camera pans out, and the soft glow from the crystal in John's hand reflects off the snow-covered ground, casting a faint light into the dark, silent night. The stars above seem to shimmer brighter than ever, and as the screen fades to black, there's a sense that the journey is far from over. End credits. A soft, melodic tune begins to play, echoing through the stillness, as the camera glides over the thriving land below John's world, now forever changed. The stars above shine brightly, as if signaling the eternal bond between Keris and the world she left behind. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey into the unknown here at HFY Sci-Fi Love and War Story. We hope you enjoyed tonight's tale of adventure, mystery, and the bond between worlds. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on all our future episodes, where more thrilling encounters with aliens, mysteries, and the unknown await. Your support helps us bring these stories to life, and we can't wait to share more with you. Until next time, remember the universe is vast, and the greatest stories are often the ones still waiting to be discovered. See you in the next episode.